a Times Union podcast.
Previously on The Girl in the Pond.
I knew she'd never leave without saying goodbye.
She was dead before an hour's time was expired. So that's why I think she was choked.
The hiring of a rig at William T. Shine's livery has been thoroughly explained. It had nothing to do with the mysterious death of the Drew girl.
I'm Jessica Marshall.
And I'm Patrick Tyne. This is The Girl in the Pond, Episode 9, The Inquest.
'Tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone, all her lovely companions are faded and gone.
By the end of July 1908, things were getting uncomfortable in Troy for District Attorney Jarvis O'Brien. The newspapers were not holding back on criticizing his handling of the case. Why hadn't he made an arrest? Why hadn't he solved this thing? Here's a snippet from the New York World on July 23, 1908.
If the murderer of Hazel Drew escapes the penalty of his atrocious crime, Rensselaer County citizens will have official inactivity to blame. Promptness and thoroughness have been sadly lacking in the efforts of Troy's authorities to unravel the mystery.
By the end of July 1908, it seemed like O'Brien had reached a breaking point. He finally called for a coroner's inquest after 3 weeks of investigating. An inquest would officially determine the cause of death. It was the step that would finalize whether he'd have to keep on looking for a murderer or whether he could just let it go and move on.
O'Brien was running for re-election that November. He was a star in Troy's Republican Party, but it was at a time when a Democratic surge by a growing immigrant population was threatening to topple the political machine. There was a lot at stake for O'Brien, if he wanted to keep his job. From our vantage point, 120 years in the future, the obvious best possible outcome for O'Brien would have been to solve the case, preferably in a dramatic fashion. Find the actual murderer or murderers and string them up for the world to see, and then bask in the glory and sail on to another term in office. The worst case scenario would be to let it remain unsolved, right? His rep would take a hit before a big election and he could lose spectacularly. Were those the best and worst possible outcomes, though?
Remember, in the last episode, we learned there's strong evidence that two men a witness saw by the pond the night Hazel Drew was believed to have died were William Cushing and Fred Schatzel, both Republican selectmen from South Troy. The outing of two party boys as murderers, wouldn't that be a huge chink in the armor of a machine already suspected of rampant corruption? Catastrophizing here for a second, it could cause a chain reaction that could upend the power structure in Troy. One could reasonably assume a DA up for re-election would want to avoid that.
And on top of that, if Cushing and Schatzel were in fact the murderers, maybe O'Brien was actively facing intense pressure to cover it up from party bosses. If that were the case, he'd either have to come up with enough evidence that would hold up in court to pin it on a patsy, maybe Frank Smith, the simple farmhand, or William Taylor, the uncle. Or he'd have to prove that Hazel's death was not a murder.
As we mentioned in episode 5, pinning it on a patsy is risky. What if a Clarence Darrow-type people's lawyer figure came out of the woodwork to defend an innocent man and crush their case? That could also open up a floodgate that could expose corruption in the machine. You could put the whole city on trial. Seems like O'Brien was in a tough spot any way you slice it. Damned if he did, damned if he didn't.
So what else was an incumbent DA from a political machine facing a tough election to do? Whether Cushing and Schatzel were the murderers or not, and whether he was being forced to cover something up or not? What was his only move? Prove that Hazel Drew killed herself. And from the looks of things, on July 27th, 1908, that's exactly what he was fixin' to do. Here's a bit from the Times-Union that day.
The inquest into the death of Hazel Drew began this afternoon at Averill Park. Coroner Strope presided, and District Attorney Jarvis P. O'Brien conducted the examination. Quite a sensation was produced when it was learned that the district attorney had brought Dr. Herrick, one of Troy's most eminent physicians. Dr. Herrick is to be a witness. What bearing he can have on the case was only surmised at first, but the impression has gone forth that District Attorney O'Brien is going to take refuge behind the suicide theory. Although 5 physicians have said that the girl was dead before she struck the water, it is stated that Dr. Herrick is to throw doubt on the autopsy and declare, from what he has inquired into, that the girl committed suicide and the blow on the back of the head was caused by hitting a rock near the shore as she went down.
If Jarvis O'Brien could prove Hazel Drew died by suicide, then there was no murder to investigate, no one to blame. If he could prove suicide, he could get this huge monkey off his back without damaging his reputation or that of the machine.
The reason for committing suicide has been hinted at, that the girl was in a condition that she feared to face the world with and went to Teal's Pond to hide her shame in death. Other physicians, it is also asserted, are to be sworn, and they will, probably, also advance the idea of suicide.
How easy would it be to move the narrative back to maybe she was pregnant, spurned by a lover, and saw death as her only way out of the shame? In this time period and society, it probably wouldn't have been that hard to get a public obsessed with sensational cases to believe that. The doctors who performed the autopsy determined that the cause of death was a blow to the back of the head. There was no water in her lungs, so she did not drown. There was a ribbon around her neck, but doctors said choking was not the cause of death. Mark Marshall, the retired Rensselaer County resident who took up the case in his free time, thinks Jarvis O'Brien knew exactly what he was doing.
Well, even Jarvis O'Brien, I think, was using Hazel's death as a fallback. If he couldn't prove who killed her, he told the doctors that they couldn't say that she was choked. They had a meeting with one of the doctors' houses out here, and Jarvis O'Brien said that they couldn't say that Hazel was murdered. He also told the doctors they couldn't say that she was strangled, because I think he was looking for, if he couldn't prove that who the killers were, then he would have a fallback on going to that she committed suicide.
Right.
If they proved that she was choked, the doctor said she was choked, and it's no suicide.
The coroner's inquest began on July 27, 1908. It was held in a dance hall in Sand Lake, and it was packed. The New York World painted a vivid picture of the scene.
Charcoal burners, mountaineers, plain ordinary farmers and city folk, including many pretty girls, sweltering under merry widow hats, crowded a small pavilion in Averill Park this afternoon when the inquest was opened. The scene was novel. The pavilion, which is frequently used for political and other public gatherings, is ordinarily a dance hall. It was hardly large enough to accommodate District Attorney O'Brien, his staff, and force of witnesses, not to speak of the throng of morbidly curious.
The Rensselaer County coroner was Morris Strope, another Republican. Strope was the judge and jury here. It wasn't a murder trial, but in some ways, it kind of was. As we discussed in episode 5 of this podcast, law and order was very different in 1908 than it is today. A coroner's inquest was a legit way a prosecutor could go after a murderer. They could do it without bringing charges against anyone or even solving the case. The first witness called at this inquest were the young boys and the farmer who discovered Hazel's body in the pond on July 11, 1908. They described what they saw and did that day. No surprises there. Then came Frank Smith, the 17-year-old farmhand who saw Hazel walking along the Taborton Road before she died. O'Brien put this kid through the ringer. He grilled the boy about the last time he'd seen her before that. Smith had claimed to have seen Hazel in Taborton in April, something that a carriage driver named John Abel also claimed. Hazel's family had adamantly denied it was Hazel, saying both Smith and the driver mistook her for another woman who looked like her.
What has any of that got to do with her cause of death? It seemed like a blatant attempt to cast doubt on Frank Smith's credibility. Was O'Brien leaving the door open at this point to pin the crime on Smith? Why else would he waste time with a line of questioning like that?
Next on the stand was Rudy Gundrum. He was the charcoal burner with Frank Smith that night. He backed up Smith's story about seeing Hazel on the road. Then came the Rollmans, the couple who saw Hazel picking berries near the pond. Then a few more mountaineers were called up. All of them had been on the road that night. None of them had seen Hazel Drew there, but they confirmed seeing Smith, Gundrum, the Rollmans, and the key witness who was coming up to the stand next, William Huffey. On the stand, Huffey told his story exactly as he told it to investigators and the media, that he'd seen two men by the pond that night, a nervous-looking, sandy-haired guy with a mustache sitting in the driver's seat of a Concord wagon with yellow rims, and another man with dark hair rifling through the bushes near the shore of the pond, where Hazel's body had been pulled out.
Remember that William Cushing and Fred Schatzel had already been cleared by investigators at this point. O'Brien didn't seem to press Huffey like he had Frank Smith, or really press him at all.
Hazel's uncle, William Taylor, took the stand next. Like Frank Smith, investigators had been suspicious of Taylor as the potential killer. Here's a bit from the Times-Union on July 27, 1908.
District Attorney O'Brien put him through the third degree in an unmerciful manner. While Taylor answered some questions in a puzzling manner, the district attorney is satisfied he has told all he knows and is in no ways concealing anything.
The proceedings were underwhelming. Nothing new came to light. They bled into the next day when doctors took the stand. Here's more from the Times-Union.
When Dr. Boyce, the coroner's physician, was on the stand, District Attorney O'Brien advanced the first theory of suicide. Dr. Boyce related the findings of the autopsy and said he was positive that death had been produced by a blow on the head and that Hazel was dead before her body reached the water. To refute this, the district attorney asked if it wasn't true that a large percentage of persons found drowned had no water in the lungs. Dr. Boyce, though, wouldn't admit it, and he was backed up by Drs. Fairweather and Reichard, who assisted at the autopsy.
The doctors weren't giving in to O'Brien's pressure to concede that Hazel's death could have been a suicide. Neither the doctors nor O'Brien mentioned anything about the corset ribbon, though, or Hazel being choked.
The inquest yesterday afternoon and last evening at Averill Park produced what everyone expected it would. Nothing.
After 2 days of testimony, the coroner suddenly moved the proceedings to the courthouse in Troy. Huffey's powerful testimony seemed to have brought out some lingering tension between the mountaineers and the city folk gathered together for the inquest. The investigators from Troy had been poking around Sand Lake for 3 weeks up to that point. Maybe the mountaineers and townsfolk were sick of them, and the city folks feared the repercussions of that.
When the inquest resumed in the city of Troy, Hazel's mother, Julia Drew, took the stand. Here's a description of her testimony from the Times-Union on July 30th, 1908.
Mrs. Drew, the mother, was on the stand for a good part of the afternoon. She was very indifferent to surroundings and seemed to take the matter lightly. She smiled at intervals and showed a coldness that was remarkable.
Minnie Taylor took the stand that day, too. O'Brien went hard on her, but she didn't give an inch. I wish we could say that the inquest was a dramatic finale to this story, but the truth is, it was anything but. It was disjointed and unorganized. The only moment that bears mentioning was a brief side plot that arose on the third day of testimony.
Remember, Sand Lake was a popular summer destination. There were a lot of wealthy men who owned summer camps on and around Taborton. Some of those camps, usually sprawling lakeside cabins, it was rumored, played host to wild sex parties. A hotelier had come forward in the last week to say they saw a scantily clad girl matching Hazel's description who showed up desperate to use the phone. She said she'd been lured to one of the camps by men and trapped without any money to get home. A housekeeper at one of the other camps said they heard a woman screaming at a neighboring camp the night Hazel was believed to have been killed, and then heard an automobile speeding away from it.
We aren't going to spend much time on this side plot here because it seems highly unlikely that this was Hazel, given what we know about her movements that day and night. But the idea that she would have been caught up in a secret life of sexy parties at rich people's camps certainly made for a compelling storyline in the age of yellow journalism.
But still, O'Brien felt that this was worth exploring. Maybe he genuinely thought it could be Hazel. Or maybe he was throwing out a red herring. He brought in the owner of the camp where the housekeeper heard the scream. His name was Henry Cramroth. Cramroth was a rich businessman from Albany. He drove a fancy automobile. He denied Hazel was ever at his camp, or that he even knew her. And just like that, the inquest was over. The next day, July 31st, 1908, the coroner rendered his verdict.
From testimony taken on the above dates, I find that the said Hazel Irene Drew came to her death from extravasation of blood in the dura mater, caused by a blow on the head from some blunt instrument in some manner unknown.
In other words, Hazel Drew was killed by a blow to the head, but he couldn't tell how. Was it murder? Was it an accident? He just couldn't say.
After the coroner's verdict, the case stopped appearing in newspapers. O'Brien took his detectives off the case. Even though it still could have been a murder, no one seemed to care anymore. The world seemed to have moved on. O'Brien was free. The Times-Union had one final parting thought, though.
Today in Troy, they are relating how easy it is to kill a woman in Rensselaer County and, quote, get away with it. They are referring to the murder of Mamie Killian 7 years ago. Then there was another Troy young woman named Furlong, living on 3rd Street, whose body was found on the road a few years ago. It was established beyond dispute that she was murdered, but the officials soon gave up the hunt.
Hazel Drew's case was not the first to end this way, and it wouldn't be the last.
We'll be right back.
The decisions made at the state capitol in New York impact all of us, from our property taxes to the cost of health care or our civil rights. It's all really complicated, but I'm here to help you sort through it. I'm Dan Clark, author of the Capitol Confidential newsletter from the Times-Union. Find that at capitalconfidential.com. That's capital with an O. capitalconfidential.com. See you there.
We are always busy here in the Times-Union newsroom, whether it's covering breaking news, writing in-depth features, or giving the latest local sports highlights. There is a lot that goes into what you read in print and online at timesunion.com and on all of our social channels. So join me, Jessica Marshall, every week on The Eagle, a Times-Union podcast, we'll pull back the curtain and go in depth on the news that we're covering and the award-winning journalists who bring it to you at the oldest and largest newspaper in New York's capital region. Listen to The Eagle at timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts. This is the question. This is the moment that we've been waiting for, I think, you and I, throughout this whole process, is when we sat down and talked through who done it.
Yeah. Everything else is important. The history is important. The sociological implications are important. The societal trends, the turn of the century, all of that is important. But it is... At
its core, it's a mystery.
It's a mystery. It's a whodunit. What stands out to you?
If you've listened thus far to our series, you would probably not be surprised that the Cushing and Schatzel theory stands out strongest to you and I. It has the most circumstantial evidence, I think, that could hold up in a court of law. But if you look at other books and media that have covered this story, there are a couple of other people who've been bandied about as potential suspects.
Mark and Bob's theory on who killed Hazel Drew is not the only one out there. There are books and articles and even a film about the case. Others who have researched it have come to very different conclusions, many of which have nothing to do with Cushing and Schatzel.
Let's go through those theories now. There's one that the murderer was one of Hazel's employers. Former city treasurer Thomas Hislop, businessman John Tupper, or Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute professor and city engineer E.R. Carey. All three of these men were fabulously wealthy, though Hislop would fall from his lofty perch amid scandal. The theory holds that one of them was having an affair with Hazel and wanted to cover it up. Either they killed her themselves or hired someone to do their dirty work. What are your thoughts on the wealthy employers as potential suspects?
If one of the employers was the one who did it, would they have the wherewithal and the cold-bloodedness and the ability to kind of mix it up with the sort of people who could carry out a crime like this, like to order like an assassination of someone or like to kill someone on orders versus something killing Hazel because it's like, oh, she's going to tell my wife or she's going to do something to damage me financially or damage her reputation, and I just hit them in the drawing room or something.
Yeah.
Of course, she wasn't really there in any of those places anymore. She was out of the fold. But the idea that like the steps involved with having to do that don't necessarily exonerate some of the employers, but I think there's just so many steps there to get to the pond that I think it makes it maybe a little less likely. But you certainly can't put a conspiracy past a person with resources.
Right. Who are the other players in this story, right? There is a theory that maybe it was this mysterious dentist that Hazel allegedly was engaged to or who proposed to her. She wasn't engaged to him. We know nothing about this dentist.
Or how that relationship came to be even beyond, presumably like dental work, especially not having any of we didn't have the full breadth of her correspondence and her letters. And today we don't have anything. It would be interesting to see like how they were communicating, if they were communicating, what was he writing increasingly like unhinged, proposals and love poems or whatever, that could give an insight into, because all we know right now is that he was a dentist and he proposed.
We don't even know if he's real, actually. Like, no dentist copped to any sort of like affair with Hazel or any sort of like infatuation or relationship with her. So maybe she just made it up, like we all occasionally make little white lies about things, right? Like
my girlfriend who goes to a different school, my girlfriend from Canada or whatever, like
exactly. He might not even be real. I mean, there are some other like would-be lovers, I think, if you really go deep into the investigation. Like there's just kind of peripheral characters mentioned that we didn't really talk about here. Like there was like a law student, I think, and then there was an artist who had sent her a letter, and that there were all these different peripheral characters who you could make as equally compelling a case about as you could about this dentist, because we don't have proof of their existence. So I mean, for me, the dentist theory doesn't hold any water. Who else is there? I mean, Aunt Minnie's the only other kind of suspicious character throughout all of this. I mean,
that would be a very, like, Who Shot Mr. Burns if Maggie did it. Like, Aunt Minnie killed Hazel Drew.
There is an adaptation for it.
That would be a very interesting kind of alternate ending.
Yeah. I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think Aunt Minnie had anything to do with Hazel's death. I just think, as Mark had pointed out, or Bob had pointed out earlier in the series, she was just kind of caught up in the propriety and the, not wanting to keep her head down and all of that.
And maybe like a bit of a custodian of memory.
And she wanted to keep Hazel's reputation pure.
Yes.
And she just didn't have, a great way of communicating that, I think, at least to the people who she was communicating to at the time.
Absolutely.
So I think Aunt Minnie's clear. Jarvis O'Brien and his crew of county detectives put a lot of their effort into investigating 3 of the mountaineers: Frank Smith, William Taylor, and a 20-year-old named Tom Sawalski. Sawalski, like Frank Smith, was considered dim-witted. Their words, not ours. He lived on the farm where Hazel's little brother Willie was staying at the time. When detectives questioned Willie about Tom Sawalski, he had this to say.
He's big and naughty.
Sawalski said he was home all night on July 7th, 1908. There were no witnesses who saw him outside of his home that night. Where do you stand on the culpability or potential culpability of any of the mountaineers?
Well, I think William Taylor, her uncle, there's something about him, like if I was making a movie about this, he would be like the red herring villain who turns out to actually have a heart of gold and is misunderstood. As like a person who she got herself into trouble or something, or was sick. We don't know. I mean, that, and needed a place to go that was not on the other side of the world, but also like farther away from like her family and farther away from Troy and all of that, that he was just in some ways like a weird guy, but also maybe a little more like willing to give her like a space. That's just maybe a kind of a rosy view of it. So I don't think he did it.
I don't think so either. I don't think he had any knowledge.
But I also don't think he did himself any favors.
Right.
He acted guilty because he's just an ordinary man who's like on the mountain. And again, that's a person where, maybe if this were happening today, the police would put out a vague statement about, we have a persons of interest.
Right.
And it would turn into, photographers and the TV news crews, camped outside of his house.
Absolutely. I think I'm on the same page with you with that one. What about Frank Smith and Tom Sawalski? These guys, now I know Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men was several decades in the future, so this story didn't exist at the time, but I definitely get the sense that they're kind of painted as kind of a Lenny Small type character, right? Like big, simple, doesn't really know his own strength. The idea that maybe he could have accidentally or on purpose, but in his own kind of simple way, killed Hazel. Like they were really kind of going for that at the end, I think, the DA there. They thought Frank Smith was, and the media too, like he was always a dim-witted farm boy, a half-witted farmhand.
It's certainly not hard to get from dim-witted farm boy to oafish murderer. What's the motive? I mean, is it sexual assault? I don't know. I mean, what is the series of events?
Right. Frank Smith had Rudy Gundrum and the Rollmans and the Yabauers and the Rye Millers and all of those farmers saw him further down the mountain when it's believed that Hazel was killed. So there's no direct placement of him. And yes, he told, or at least according to these accounts, he told some kind of conflicting stories about where he was that night. But
also, I mean, but how many times was he questioned? I mean, the little details change all the time in stories, and there's right. People's recall of their own actions and movements that they don't expect to be questioned on. Like what did you have for lunch 2 days ago?
I don't remember.
None of these people were questioned with lawyers. None
right.
of these people were being
borderline harassed, I think.
Borderline harassed, as Richard Ham said. And it was not alleged in this case, but there was the third degree was a thing. So it's a very intimidating. I mean, I think being questioned by the police or a DA is intimidating no matter what. But I don't put a lot of stock into them. Especially with what we know the Huffies saw.
The Huffies, that is the key to everything for me. You have a witness with a very powerful account there is strong evidence connecting his account to two individuals in Troy. Like, it just, you cannot put that aside and say, oh, it was a mere coincidence. Like,
and two individuals that were seen at the water's edge.
Right. I think I agree with the theory that it was a sexual assault or an attempted sexual assault. I think that's what happened. I don't think this was a politically motivated hit. I don't think she knew too much. I don't think she was having an affair with either of them. I think it was just she was overpowered by two men who felt empowered to do stuff like this.
Even if we are satisfied with who we think Hazel Drew's killers were, there are still many unanswered questions surrounding her case. Let's run through a few of them now.
Do we think it was covered up by O'Brien? Do you think the political machine was involved in absolving these guys? Because they were very quickly absolved with a very flimsy, in my opinion, it was a coincidence. I was driving with my girlfriend and I just happened to be very close by. Like, what do you think of that?
I mean, it doesn't look good. I'm not sure what was necessarily guiding the heart of Jarvis O'Brien. I don't know. I still go back to thinking, like, why not pin it on somebody else?
You could go down this rabbit hole for hours and hours and hours. We could probably make 10 more episodes based on all these theories. But
totally,
I think to simplify it for us and for our audience, I think we just can't really tell what O'Brien was doing. It's a very complicated situation. There's a lot of powers that conflicting, in some cases, powers at play. Like, it's not a straightforward narrative where O'Brien could be painted as this kind of like snidely whiplash type, character who is like, we've got to cover this up. Like, it's not that simple. And of course, he could have been playing it by the book the whole time. He could have been, earnest and honest. Like, we can't say that he wasn't.
That's also true.
How did Hazel, did she have a lot of money? Like, was she just really obscenely good with money? Did she have another income stream? Was she rich because of the whole Hislop treasurer thing? Like, where do you stand on, like, how she had money to do things that she did?
What's the proof that she had money at all? Like, she had some nice clothes.
She went on trips.
She went on trips. She had a nice brooch.
I think that where a lot of that comes from is from kind of testimony of her friends. Like Carrie Weaver, she openly wondered about that.
Hazel was a remarkable girl. I never could manage to buy the fine hats and swell costumes that she wore, although our wages were the same. I never quite understood how Hazel managed. Not only did she wear expensive clothes, but she had elaborate luncheons at fashionable restaurants besides making many trips out of town. I really don't believe that Hazel went with any men, for she never told me. Still, it was always puzzling to me.
I don't know if Carrie Weaver was exaggerating or the circumstance actually was with Hazel, but I think that's where that came from. And then the press kind of latched on to that, and maybe that ended up being a complete embellishment. I don't know.
Maybe, but also now when you think about it though, this was an era where you had to pay up front. There was no credit card. There was no credit. In fact, even if there were credit cards, women were not allowed to have credit cards until the 70s, which is insane. But the idea that like the travel and whatever clothes that she did have that weren't gifts, and that is, again, another question.
Yeah.
Maybe she was receiving lavish gifts from people.
Right. Or maybe just her wealthy employer was.
Yeah, or were there hand-me-down things? Or
or we want our employees to look a certain way or to, to portray a certain level of opulence. So I think the question of the money remains unsolved, and you could come up with any number of fanciful theories about where she got the money.
But you could also save a lot of money. Maybe that's why she was able to quit.
Yeah.
Was because, she'd realized that she was where she wanted to be, to have her money right, to go on to wherever she was going ultimately.
Yeah, but where was the money? People had to carry cash on them.
Yeah, and like and it's not like she was like whatever money she was making, she was like squirreling away in like a cigar box back in Post and Kill.
That would have been found unless maybe one of the relatives
unless they took it. Also, like, what I would like to know, let's assume she had saved up a bunch of money and had enough to like finance an expeditionary period in order to figure out what her next move was going to be.
Right.
How much was that? Is that like $500.
She could have had thousands of dollars. I don't know. Who knows?
That's true.
Although if she had thousands of dollars, you'd think that maybe she would have gotten out of there sooner, or she would
have gotten out of there sooner. She would have. Well,
maybe she wouldn't have needed help from John Magner to get started in New York, right?
For sure.
The conductor.
Again, this is just rank speculation.
That's all we can do here.
Maybe she did have money on her the night of the killing, and she was going to go see her brother and going to give him some money, some walking around money. And I know they said her belongings weren't stolen, but maybe she had,
maybe she had
money
cash on her.
Maybe she had cash in her.
Maybe Cushing and Schatzel took it.
Maybe they took it. You would have. If you're about to embark upon a long journey, you would have.
You're not going to leave it in your suitcase that was checked at the train station.
No.
You would have it. I would have it tucked into my undergarments.
Yes. We take as read, nothing was stolen.
Right. And she only had a 5-cent piece in her glove,
Yeah, but, something might have been stolen.
There are many more unanswered questions about this case, of course. But how many of the answers to those questions are essential to piecing together the full picture of what happened to Hazel Drew? Sometimes probing the overwhelming plot holes in her story feels like banging your head on drywall. You're left with a headache and potentially a hole in your wall and a mess to clean up. Getting the answer to who killed Hazel only tells a fraction of her story. She's a victim of circumstance, of class divide, of systemic gender inequality, and probably to some extent she was a victim of her own normal human qualities like pride and ambition. If you're someone who believes in an afterlife, maybe she's free and happy in the great beyond, having moved on despite her case remaining unsolved. But then, why are people still seeing her ghost? Whether you take that figuratively or literally, many of the beats in her tale still resonate with modern cases of murdered women. Could knowledge of Hazel's story help solve others? Or could it serve to draw attention to other cases of missing or murdered women that have been lost or forgotten? We sure hope so. That's why we made this podcast.
Three months after the inquest, in November of 1908, Jarvis O'Brien lost his bid for re-election spectacularly. He was beaten by Democrat Abbott Jones, an attorney who would go on several decades later to represent notorious bootlegger Jack Legs Diamond. O'Brien went back to private practice. He died in 1936. Hazel's family moved on with their lives after the inquest ended. Many of them stayed in and around Troy. A few of their descendants are still in the area today.
They worked with Bob Moore and Mark Marshall for a time around 2018 to try and solve Hazel's case. They still very much care about finding the truth.
We contacted Hazel's relatives to extend an invitation to be on this podcast. They politely declined, but told us they support our efforts to keep the case in the public eye.
Last spring, we met up with Sand Lake town historian Bob Moore and Mark Marshall. They took us to the cemetery in rural Rensselaer County where Hazel Drew is buried.
They were originally going to bury her in Mount Ida Cemetery down in Troy, but then they decided to bury her up here.
The cemetery is on a slope along a quiet country road. You can hear the faint sound of running water from the Poston Kill, the large creek that winds through Rensselaer County. Follow it a little less than 15 miles and it opens up into the Hudson River in Troy.
Peaceful spot.
It's beautiful.
Hazel Drew is buried next to her parents and siblings in a plot about halfway up the hill. Her headstone is distinct from her family, though. It's at the far left of their plot. It looks a lot older, more weathered. But it's also more elegant. Its uniqueness draws your eye. Emblematic, perhaps, of how she was perceived in life. The gray-white limestone slab is a little more than a foot tall and only slightly wider. It's rounded at the top, set on a bulky rectangular plinth. A large crack emanates from the bottom, spidering its way across the diagonal. There's probably some symbolism in that crack, something about how the crack creeps up the stone, marring its elegance. But maybe that's all a stretch in a desperate search for meaning. There's an elegant floral pattern engraved across the top, and in the middle, it simply reads, "At rest."
Bob and Mark stand at a respectful distance while we get a closer look. They've been here many times and seem to find continued purpose in going back. Mark went back recently, actually, after the first few episodes of this podcast came out. Hazel's grave had been decorated with colorful stones, a cheerful reminder that her memory lives on.
Bring people to it, and maybe we can solve it.
Yeah. You guys really move this forward. Like, what happens if it does get solved? What do you do then?
Close his book on it.
Yeah.
What do you think happened to Hazel Drew? We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@timesunion.com.
Tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone. All her lovely companions are faded and gone. No flower of her kindred, no rosebud is nigh to reflect back her blushes or give sigh for sigh.
The Girl in the Pond is a production of the Times Union. It's produced by me, Jessica Marshall, and Patrick Tyne. Written and mixed by me, Jessica Marshall. Editorial direction and fact-checking by Erica Smith and Casey Seiler. Production help from Daniel Roberts, Sarah Diodato, David Johnson, and Mike Goodwin. Special thanks to Tony Pallone, Bill Douglas, Arlo Harrison, Roebling Harrison, Rick Marshall, and Amira Ditchy for lending their voices. Our theme song is The Last Rose of Summer, written by Thomas Moore. Musical arrangement by Matthew A. Streifert. Vocals by Josephine Diodato. Additional music supplied by Lionel Cohen, Francois Couture, John Alderson, and Vyacheslav Dragunov via Getty Images.